and bring it on. Here it is. Dom Famularo here. I am live again. This time, Mapex All Access. I'm with Doug Bush. So would you please welcome everybody, Doug Bush. Doug, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dom.
Doug, we've met a few times at PASIC, as we had mentioned just before we started here, about just in our times of meeting together. And it's one thing which drummers do. We get together and we meet, we talk, and we hang, and it really is an incredibly close-knit society that we're a part of.
Absolutely, no question.
This is so great. Now, I know you're in Texas, from what I understand, right?
Yes, sir. Dallas area, in Plano, Texas. It's a suburb of Dallas.
I know Plano for sure. And in this year, I want to go back. I mean, you're involved with not only drum set, but you're involved with a lot of the marching and the drum corps side of what's happening. That really is extremely intriguing, because that really is your involvement with Mapex and Majestic in what you do. So I'd like to go back, if we can. Let's go back just to the beginning days of just, I believe you played piano before, or, was that your first instrument?
Yes, I was very fortunate to have two parents that, even though neither were necessarily formally trained musicians, they both had a strong appreciation of music and thought it was very important for me and my younger sister to be involved in music and to be a part of our life. So there was always music playing. My dad always had classic rock playing on the radio, and he was working in the garage on the weekends. And, my mom was more into musicals and kind of the contemporary pop music of the 80s. So you grew up with music, and they both thought it was important for us my sister and I, to start with piano, because they had heard that it was the universal instrument, that if we learned piano as we got older, we could go to whatever we desired. And to be honest, Tom, it wasn't that much fun. I didn't enjoy it. I loved music, but the act of playing piano just didn't resonate a ton with me. And once I hit middle school, I wanted to pick up chicks, so I played guitar. I got a cherry red Fender Strat, and same kind of deal. I started to develop my own musical taste in middle school, as a lot of us do. I was very fortunate to be of the age right when kind of the alternative rock grunge scene hit. So we're saying like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, all those bands and that whole kind of genre hit about the same time I was maturing musically, I'd say. So I was into that and played guitar for a couple of years, but again, it didn't really speak to my soul. It was just a cool thing to do, right? And then in high school, my mother, my freshman year, I guess I was like 14, she signed me up for marching band and didn't tell me. And right before school started, she said, "Hey, I got to let you know, I signed you up for marching band." Are you kidding me? Only nerds do marching band. What are you talking about? I don't even think I can play guitar in marching band. Sure enough, I met the band director, and he's like, no, there's we can't have any electronics, because if it rains, there could be damages, which is hilarious to me now, because electronics are a huge part of the marching arts and multiple facets. But he said, "What else can you do?" I said, "Well, I know some piano." "Okay, you'll be our front ensemble." He gave me a glockenspiel kit, and I was at the front of the field. I remember the very first pep rally we had, there was maybe about half a dozen drummers in there, and they started playing these drum cadences, and they were so like loud and passionate and fast and aggressive, and it switch flipped. It changed my life forever immediately. It was like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. This feels incredible. And in Texas, I'm not sure if it's like this in the rest of the country, but we have something in high school called no pass, no play, which means if you don't pass all your classes, you can't do your extracurricular activities. You can't do football, you can't do cheerleading, you can't do chess club, you can't do marching band.
Very interesting. Wow.
And so after the first 6-week period, everyone in the drumline failed, but like two kids, like me and another kid. So at the football game, they're like, "You're promoted. You now play the quads." And they just put a drum on me, and they handed me a pair of drumsticks, and I just improvised the show. And yeah, that Christmas got my first drum set. That summer mowed yards to save up to buy cymbals, like the classic, kind of story. And from that moment on, I knew immediately, like, this is my life. I am a drummer.
Well, isn't it amazing how the instrument speaks to us, and the feeling that we get from it just resonates and vibrates with who we are as people, that we just know right there, this is it.
Yep, absolutely.
So the school music program was probably a big, advantage for you in your musical growth.
Yeah, in the high school area, it was a very small band. But the plus side of that is I was fortunate to get my degree in music education from the University of North Texas, which is obviously a very prestigious music school and percussion school. So many greats, Bissonette and Carlock and stuff have come from there, right? And but when I entered North Texas, I was a little behind the curve in terms of my technical prowess. Like a lot of the other students already understood four mallets. They were better at reading than I was. They had a stronger technical foundation because they had come from these kind of, Texas is a unique place that there's a lot of pride in its music education at the high school level. So there's a lot of resources that go towards. So you have some just high school programs that are just, I mean, it's very privileged. Yeah, it's a wonderful place. I was coming from Dallas, like a pretty small, kind of school in the city, and with a small band, and never really had like a drumline teacher or anything like that, so I felt a little behind the curve technically. However, the benefit of being in that small program was I had a lot of freedom. That by my junior year, I was allowed to kind of just teach the drumline. I was the drumline teacher, and I was allowed to write the music for the marching show, to compose the music for it, which I wouldn't have gotten to do in another program where there was an established. And those things I felt in the longevity of my career ended up being more helpful, because once I left North Texas, I had this skill set of teaching and composing, which are actually the things that I enjoy to do more than performing, to be honest with you, and was able to kind of fashion my life into what it is now. Whereas if you just have a really strong technical performance on like, marimba or something, there's only so many gigs in the world, for that. So
yeah. Well, I'm making some notes as you're speaking because I want to get back to that. So at a point in your, before you got to North Texas State, were you playing with different bands and other musicians and getting together and jamming out, or what was happening at that part?
Yes, sir. Absolutely, Dom. There was the high school marching band and wind ensemble, like I've touched on, which, were good formative experiences. But again, growing up in that time period, I was in a lot of rock bands and alternative rock bands and kind of metal bands when I was younger. We would gig down in Dallas, or house parties until the police showed up for noise complaints, right? And then as I got older, a couple of friends of mine that I was in bands with made it to Booker T, which is the kind of arts magnet in Dallas, and they started to be exposed to jazz, and they started to learn, about, Miles and Coltrane and all the greats, and they started to introduce me to that. And so my late high school / early college became more about playing in like a trio setting, or things of that nature. And at that time, I hooked up with a wonderful drum instructor here in Dallas, Henry Oxtell, who also taught for many years at North Texas. And
I know Henry. What a prince of a guy! What an absolute prince of a person, and a great educator.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Don. That is the truth. And he's showing me Tony Williams and Max Roach and Roy Haynes, and just like teaching me what a 3/2 rumba clave is, and just opening my world up musically. And so it was just a wonderful experience. And so that was kind of transitionary, like the end of my high school, my last couple of years of high school, into my first couple of years of North Texas.
So was that when was Ed Sof there also?
Yes, sir. Yep.
And did you have any classes? Did you work with Ed at all?
No, I didn't work with Ed because I was a music education major, right? And there's so much demand to get to study with Ed when he was there, right? That pretty much if you were a jazz study major, you got to study with. I think in the entire time I was there, there's only one, maybe two education majors that I can remember that got to study with Ed, and it was for like maybe a semester. So I was never in any of the lab bands. I was more of a drumline guy, and the stuff that I was playing on drum set was more extracurricular, removed from the university. It was more like with different trios or rock bands.
Yeah. So were there any drummers that were influencing you at that time? Was there anybody that you were kind of really leaning towards?
Man, I mean, yes, of course, right? And it's tough, Dom. I mean, is you understand so well, being such an amazing motivational speaker as well. It's like inspiration comes from all kinds of places.
Yeah.
Just because you're a drummer. For me, it fell and has always fallen, I guess, into three different categories, like the drummers and percussionists that have inspired me, the other musicians that have inspired me, and then the things maybe outside of music. So, like for drummers, just, you know, a couple off the top of my hands, like I've been like, or off the top of my head, like I mentioned earlier, you know, Roy Haynes, like some of his early stuff and later stuff. I mean, it's just incredible. Jojo Mayer was a huge and remains to be a huge, you know, inspiration for me. And then, you know, there were some pioneers kind of in the metal community. George Kolias of Nile, who I think you even taught a little.
George Kolias is a phenomenal player. He lives in Greece and just a monster player.
Absolutely. He I was a huge fan of the band that he's a part of, Nile, before he joined, and then was, you know, became aware of him once he joined, and he just took it a whole nother level. You know, you could feel his songwriting kind of influence helping in the creative process, and he's incredible musician, you know. And then and this isn't to discredit at all, like the amazing percussion educators that I had at North Texas at the time that had a huge influence, like Christopher Dean, that was inducted in the PAS Lifetime Achievement, and Ed Smith and Puvar Sriji, and obviously Paul and Sandy Rinnick. The way that they approach the marching activity. I should mention my wife is a percussionist as well, and we met at the University of North Texas, and we write the marching band shows together and teach drumline together. And Paul and Sandy are a undoubtable influence in kind of like how we approach that, you know. So,
well, how great is that your wife's involved? So you'll creatively sit down and compose stuff with your wife?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. She is an only child. So to say compose with her is not always true, I guess. This is kind of my studio. She has her own studio, which, by the way, is much larger, much nicer than mine. And I have learned that, like, when the door is shut, you leave it shut. You don't come knocking. You don't come. But in all seriousness, yes, yeah, like we clearly over lunch and dinner and breaks and stuff, we're always kind of talking and kind of working together as a team. And, you know, they say steel sharpens steel. And I'd like to think that's kind of, you know, we've found a kind of a musical voice and working together. Again, at the end of the day, she has a gift in the teaching, the composing, and the performing that I think she equally kind of enjoys all the parts. But for me, it's a little bit more about the teaching and the composing than necessarily the performing. So, you know, we just kind of find a way to stay true to who we are, but yet let our strengths kind of impact each other and make hopefully a better experience for everyone involved, you know?
That is absolutely fantastic. Well, at some point, I'd love to speak to both of you at some point. We'll have to set up a future event to interview both of you together, because that's really a wonderful combination to have, that you have that kind of a partner in life and a partner in our creative, you know, drumming, you know, ideas. This is really rare.
It is. And as you said, it's really very fortuitous that we met. You know, when we met in college, at the time, there weren't as many females as prevalent in percussion as I'd say there are nowadays. You know, I've been teaching, I guess, for about 20 years, you know. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I've definitely noticed, just at Coppell, for example, the main place that Patricia and I teach, there are 5 senior girls that the head director, Andy Chernow, she commissioned me to write a percussion ensemble for these 5 girls that have been there since the 6th grade, you know. So when I was in college, there was only maybe about 2 or 3 females in the percussion program at UNT at the time. You know, Patricia was one of them, and she was very, very shy. So you didn't know her very well, other than she was an outstanding performer. And then in 2002 for PASIC, we were going to go compete with the drumline, and a couple of the students were going to perform solos. And Paul Rennick, the instructor, said, "Okay, well, you got to play your solos for the drumline, you know, the week before PASIC." And I can remember ending a drumline rehearsal and everyone sitting there, and then Patricia getting up and playing her marimba solo, October Night, which she won that year with, like, the collegiate division.
Yeah.
And through her playing, through the music, I was like, I see you. Okay, I see who this chick really is. You know, you could tell. And this really unassuming, small, shy, you know, girl who played with such power and passion in, you know, an expression that it was like, man, I got to get to know this chick. Right. And then one thing led to another, and here we are. So it worked out.
Boy, good for you. But fantastic. So North Texas, so you're leaning into this music education, you're taking the music education courses, and your plan is to kind of, you know, graduate school, then, you know, move on and do some education. And you mentioned about the balance between education and composing. So let's talk about composing for a while. You know, how do you know, when you're writing, where's the inspiration come from? I know you said there's all different areas, but How does the writing process work for you?
Man, wonderful question. Thank you for asking it, Tom. I love it because, yeah, that second sphere of influence was musicians that aren't drummers, and these are people like late great Chick Corea, Pat Metheny, Michelle Camilo, Shostakovich, Rachmaninoff. Like, I try very hard. The interesting thing about writing for drumline is that it's in a competitive construct, whether it's marching band or drum corps or whatever. There's going to be a judge, and they're going to assign, which has always seemed very silly to me because growing up, I'd go to a festival with like a dozen of my friends. We'd see bands all day, and we'd get in the car, driving home, and oh, who did you like? Oh, I thought Meshuggah was great, or I thought, whatever was, Slayer was the best band there, or whatever. It didn't matter. Like, everyone, there was no like who won. Well, who won the, the contest today or whatever, and so because of that, there's a lot of people in our activity that change the way they write or change the way they teach in order to try to like, get first place or win the trophy or win the, and that's never been kind of our approach ever. It's always been, we are going to write musically what we feel is the kind of the most sound, best product for the individuals we're writing for, right? Because what's appropriate for one drum corps is not going to be appropriate for a small band in Oklahoma you might be writing for, right? Yeah. We need to write something that's the most musically kind of enriching and challenging yet appropriate material. And then if we're fortunate enough to get to teach the group, the goal is very, very, very simple. The students have one objective, and that is every night when their head hits the pillow, they are better than when they woke up that morning. And that could be in any facet. They could be smarter, they could be stronger, they could develop their life more socially or spiritually, or hopefully musically, right? And that's it, because that's the thing that they can ultimately control. Those are the things that we can control. We can't control who the judge is. We can't control what the judge is looking for or not looking for, but we can control how prepared we show up to rehearsal, right? Patricia and I can control how many bands we write for, because there reaches a number where once you start to reach for too many bands, you're not able to give them the amount of time I think that they deserve for as much time as these kids are going to spend on the music, so there's a huge, the influences in that end actually do not come mostly. I would say there's a couple composers. I loved what Jeff Osmore and Jeff Prospery and, Jeff Moore, I guess all the Jeffs used to do back in the day, and Jim Casella. But as of like right now, there's not really, other than Paul and Sandy, there's not a lot of contemporary drumline guys that Patricia and I really listen to or gravitate towards for influence. It's more, like I said, like Metheny, Korea, Michelle Camilo. Like we hope that when people hear our groups that they walk away, they might not be bamboozled by the amount of chops or the number of notes, but we hope that they walk away going like, man, that is one of the most mature, like expressive groups I've ever heard. They play with more contrast. They play with the type of contrast that I would hear, Tony play with or something. That's more the goal of what we're trying to go for.
Well, that's really very, very interesting in the fact that you're pulling from these people. Are there older drum corps influences that are senior citizens of the drum corps line that are still influencing the younger generation?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, the greats of like Ralph Hardiman and Tom Hannum and these guys that kind of helped make it what it is, for sure. I mean, there is a wide breadth of I would say, the old guard to the new guard in drum corps, especially thanks to this activity called WGI. There's a lot of younger guys in that, and it's very interesting. The activity, it goes through phases. As of recently, I kind of feel that the pageantry aspects, kind of the visual aspects, we're starting to become a little bit more the priority than the musical aspects, even, unfortunately. Yeah. And I'm kind of wondering with this situation that we're in here with COVID, obviously, this is affecting a lot of budgets and a lot of time constraints. And I'm hoping maybe when we come out the other end of this, we kind of reprioritize towards the musical foundations of the activity, and kind of like a little less with the gimmicks and light shows and a little bit more about and I should clarify, this isn't to imply in any way that these students aren't phenomenal musicians now. They absolutely, can play circles around me than when I was their age,
and myself too. When I watch them play, what they're doing, and these kids are young, they are blowing me away with their skill and just the clarity of how they play. Beautiful.
Absolutely. I guess I'm just referring to more from the design standpoint, maybe what the students are being asked to do, not as much as like what they are capable of doing. What they're capable of doing is just incredible.
Yeah. So with players, like if I think back to players like Will Coxon or John Pratt, or in the NARD book, the National Association of Rudimental Drummers, there's a picture in the NARD book that's got, the 1933 beginning of NARD, this National Association of Rudimental Drumming. And there's George Lawrence Stone in there. There's J. Burns Moore. There's William Ludwig. There's Ed B. Straight. Listen, there's the old guard. Then there's the old guard.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So are those people still? Do those names come up at all? Like
Yes.
Wilson Pratt?
Yeah, absolutely. I just judged a solo contest. It was virtual, but last week, and I heard everything from things that I'd written, from my book or from newer composers, all the way to Pratt solos, to the winner, to like the rudimental activity for sure. I mean, I like the drum set activity, but it has its roots, and that's a big part of it in the tradition. Like something I know that you would be very interested in is the snare drummers at the high school I teach, Capella. We have them play match grip. They don't play traditional grip.
Oh,
yeah, and that's still, I would say, in the larger marching community, a little bit of a no-no. Like, oh no, what are you, And it's funny, even though we've had tons of success, and that's kind of modeled after the approach of Ken and Wiley, who is, I would say the de facto kind of like educator in the DFW area at Marcus High School that really kind of brought all this in. It's like, we're thinking, hey, these kids need to be able to move to a marimba and a timpani and all kinds of stuff throughout the year, right? And we had a wonderful conversation once about like how you made the transition from traditional to match and some of the reason behind that. Do you mind sharing some of those highlights again?
It was kind of interesting because what I realized is that I had studied with so many great drum set players who were traditional grip players. Joe Morello, Jim Chapin, Shelly Mann. These were, Max Roach. These were brilliant artists. But all of them, when they played match grip, they played it flawlessly. They got around the kit easily. And I always kind of intrigued. But as teachers, they taught that. And then we started analyzing. And when I was, after 37 years of playing drum set and never having a challenge with traditional grip, I just realized if both of my hands, if my left hand really was more equal to my right hand, how much more creative would I have access to, and what more tools would I have if both of my hands were equal? So with the thought of that, I said, well, I've got to go to match grip. So I made the change at 48 years young to match grip, and then I changed to open-handed playing, because by going to open-handed playing, I was now using my left side way more, a la Billy Cobham, who was the first one that really started doing that back in the 50s. And with that, I realized that when I held the stick in my right hand, that Germanic position, there were more muscles that I had access to, like 13 muscles that I had access to move that hand. And in traditional grip, I was told that you only had 4 muscles, 2 up and 2 down. So when I heard that, and I'm hearing that from Morello and Chapin and Shelly Mann, they're all telling me about this muscular movement. And I was just kind of intrigued about that. So then I realized too that I had less muscles in my traditional grip than my right hand. The other part of it was the stick sat in the web of my hand in my left hand. And that was, again, where they did that because of the marching drum on the side. I get it all why they did that in marching many, many years ago. But what happened was when it's in the web of your hand, in your right hand, in my right hand, this was my fulcrum. Well, I use this for everything. I take my glasses off. I use this fulcrum with my hat. I use it everywhere. In my left hand, the fulcrum was here. My question is, what do you use that for?
Yeah.
Believe it or not, monkeys and gorillas don't even use that grip.
Yeah.
They use their thumb and their index finger. So if I held something here, would you ever grab it this way and pass it along? So I realized that I don't use that. So let me go. So I went to that grip there. And of course, by now equalizing the amount of muscles that I had, having the same fulcrum positions and balancing my hands. My left hand has grown dramatically in these past 18, 20 years of me doing it. And it's been extremely exciting to feel the growth. Now, I don't think of left or right hand. I think of what sound do I want? If I want that sound on that side, I just go there. If I want this sound, I just go there too. So that was kind of like opened up the concept. That's why I think so. This is Copel High School that you're teaching these kids to do this, right?
Yeah, Capel High School, and it's exactly what you said. You know, when people will ask why, the answer is, you know, what I said earlier in terms of the priority is the music.
Right.
You know, I don't want to spend time like fighting a technique or a grip.
Right.
When they're already established with this, I want to spend time making music. And then the second criticism that I will sometimes receive is like, well, what if these kids want to march drum corps? And I smile and I say, well, since the year 2012, Patricia and I have had students that have marched for the Santa Clara Vanguard every year, right? So, and that group has done pretty well, like since 2012, you know. So it's not a big deal if you have that, you know, if you have that Eliana Yamuni like level student that it is, you know, when she's hitting her junior year, like clear that this chick is going to go march drum corps. Then in private lessons, okay, now it's time to learn this. Now it's time to turn it over. And that's it. But for the other, you know, what the other 98% of students, that music is going to be something that they do recreationally or they've gained appreciation for, right? You know, I'd rather spend less time, you know, working on a technique and more time learning what a 3/2 rumble clave is, right? And making sure the kids know it, right?
Good, boy, that's beautiful to hear, Doug, because it really is kind of interesting. And to work on this grip, to get this grip happening, you know, I remember, you know, Joe Morello, you know, worked for years on that grip and just had a skill with his left hand that was absolutely beautiful. But he also played in a quartet that was an acoustic band that played softer, and I didn't need the power that was needed in today's music. So here I am now playing with these funk and rock bands, and I've got to drive that band. This grip, I was going into a dangerous zone where I'm now hammering lesser muscles in a grip that I don't normally use ever anywhere else, and I'm demanding from that technique what it's not designed for.
Yeah.
So I think what your point is well taken, that we want to get to the music and we want to get to the ease. And when you're going from mallets to timpani to even drum set, that match grip concept just allows you to bring the fun factor to a higher level and not be so frustrated with, I got to work on my left hand because it's not delivering what my brain says.
Yep, absolutely. To this day, I'd say I've had about half a dozen or so, maybe 10 percussion directors from all around the country who see videos of, you know, Capel or other groups and reach out to me about it specifically. Hey, I'm thinking of going traditional to match. You know, what's the reason? I walk them through the reason. Every single one, 100% at the end of the season, man, that was the right call. I'll never go back to traditional. Yeah. Every single one. So, and even when I think about the great drum set artists like Jojo Mayer that I mentioned earlier, this is a traditional guy that I've observed as he's gotten older and older, switched to match more and more and more. And I can think, you know, like the conversation we had, I can think of drum set artists that kind of played this way, that switched this way. I don't know. I'd be curious if you know. I don't really know anyone that had really established themselves here and switched here.
Boy, interesting question. The answer is absolutely no one that I know of in my 55 years as a professional performer and 50 years as a professional teacher since the age of 17. No one has made that reversal call. And what's interesting is now players like Steve Gadd is playing 99% match grip just because he feels more comfortable with it. And we're starting to see a change of this mentality of not only to match grip, but also even more to open-handed playing. Because once you're match grip, that cross concept starts to become also the same dysfunctionality that I'm restricting myself from playing. And once you just go here, you've got all this freedom, and there's more and more players now playing open-handed on the drum set because they made the switch to match grip. So it's opened up incredible doors of opportunity.
Absolutely.
Well, this is so great to hear. So let's talk about just some of the different groups that you ended up playing with. You came out of North Texas, Phantom, and you went to Phantom, then Madison Scouts. So what was happening with all these different corps that you were playing with?
So this is, again, a very formative time. I don't know if you remember this, Don, but there used to not be the internet. There used to not be YouTube, right?
I remember that well, for sure.
Right? You used to subscribe to something called Modern Drummer. And every day, you know, once a month when it showed up, it was Christmas. And you would stare at pictures of Don Filimaro's right hand on a ride cymbal, and you would just like, why is he holding the stick like that? And where is he hitting the cymbal? And you would read it front to back over and over and over, and that's what you would do. And so I love marching band, but I didn't even know drum corps existed. And it was my junior year that a family friend, because again, I was, the internet as we know it kind of hit my senior year of high school. So it was a little bit before that, right? A family friend says, man, if this dude loves marching band, he would love this thing called drum corps. You should go check it out. And so got 2 tickets for me and my other friend Alex Bico, there's a big drummer at the high school, and we went and saw our first drum corps show live in Dallas, Texas. And the 2 kind of big corps there were the Cavaliers and the Phantom Regiment. And the Phantom Regiment was the last group on. The Phantom Regiment is known as like the classical drum corps. They play classical music, right?
Right.
And they enter the field. And again, I'm starting to become a little bit more musically mature in my taste, or I'm starting to gain a wider range of appreciation and understanding, I guess I should say. That'd be a better way of saying it. So I had this wonderful English teacher that every day would begin a creative writing assignment, but he would play classical music. And after class, I would sit with him and he would explain, oh, this is Pictures in an Exhibition, or this is The Rite of Spring, or this is, Gustav Holst's Mars, or what. And so I was getting familiar with all that and starting to appreciate it. And the Phantom Regiment takes the field. It's like a beautiful summer night, dark, and the lights are out, and there's 128 people out there dressed head to toe in black. These drums are red with like black hardware, and they're playing the music of Shostakovich. And oh man, it starts with the contras, the tubas, just this da 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 da, just this melody, and all the hairs on my body are saying, I got goosebumps. I'm just like, what is happening? And it slowly builds and builds, and the brass slowly enter, and it builds and builds. The drummers are doing nothing. They're just standing there. And then it kind of the climax, they come in with their backs to the audience with this double stroke roll, and they turn to the audience, and I'm hearing the loudest, most powerful, cleanest double stroke roll I've ever heard in my life, right? And that was the moment that was like, oh, okay, I knew earlier in life drums is what I wanted to do. And then that was the moment it was like, I have to do this. I have to do drum corps. Like whatever this is, like, one day I have to do it. Honestly, one day what I was more excited about was the opportunity to write for it. How amazing would it be to write for kids and students that can play this well in music that's this, has this much depth and whatnot. And so that's what inspired me. I actually marched for a corps called Phantom Legion, which was the feeder corps to Phantom Regiment at the time, and kind of busted my chops there. And then my age out year, I was at North Texas and doing the education thing. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, the competitive aspect of the marching activity is not something that's ever really intrigued me. And at the time, that was kind of the mantra of the Madison Scouts under the direction of Scott Stewart, was kind of this like, we're doing really fun music that the audience is going to love. And if the judges like it, great. But if they don't like it, no big deal. Like that's not really what we're about. And that appealed to me on such a level, kind of educationally, that I went out there to check it out. And funny enough, like I didn't make it. I was the last one cut from the line. I was auditioning for snare. That's what I'd played. And so I was pretty devastated. It was my age out year. I wasn't going to get to march. And about a month later, the top bass drummer, for reasons I still don't know, quit or left the corps. And so I got a phone call, and they was like, hey, would you like to come play top bass drum? And I said, well, I don't know how to play bass drum. Oh, we'll teach you. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And I immediately took my floor tom, took the legs off it and put a pillow inside it and stuck it on a dresser drawer and just started going to town, trying to figure stuff out. And funny enough, like the guys that know me and know in the area, that kind of became, in a weird way, my specialty is like the marching bass drum. Like that's kind of the thing. I've designed a marching bass drum mallet with ProMark and helped Mapex with the design of their marching bass drum, and Remo with the design of the marching bass drum heads. That kind of ultimately became my my calling again. So it was a really strange thing where it's like, I kind of thought it was maybe the snare thing until I was kind of forced in this other direction. And then it was like, oh no, this is actually what it's meant to be. And so you said earlier, isn't it amazing how when we hit that instrument, we know that's the one for us. I often wonder that. I often wonder how many young musicians are are playing something, but they're really meant to play this other thing, and they don't know simply because they've never been exposed to it or had the opportunity.
But that's the key, to be exposed to it and to have the desire to want to be exposed to it. I think is having the open mind to say, well, let me try it, as opposed to some people who are so close-minded. This is what I do, even though might not necessarily like it or not know it. This is what I do. So having that open mind is a very, very big part of the journey here, for sure. You know, we have a question. First of all, one thing Mark Bennett just brought up, which is a very, very good point. Neil Peart did go from match grip to traditional grip. For a short while, he played, test for echo,
Yep.
and went back to match grip because he just felt it was just extremely, I think, uncomfortable for him at the time of what it was. But I got a question here from Carson Groenwald, who was took some lessons with me here. He said, "I totally agree. It's weird when we turn to music into a sport. What would you suggest to a teacher that doesn't have a drum corps background, but who has a student that wants to learn drum corps, style of playing?"
Yeah, Carson, this is a great question. Again, there's pros and cons to everything, and definitely one of the pros to the internet and YouTube now is the amount of online resources available. That, I know that we would have just gobbled up at our age, right? Like when we were younger, developing musicians, the ability to seek out great online instruction. Of course, I'd be curious your thoughts on this, Dom. Like, it's wonderful that I get to teach all these lessons over Zoom. There's a difference in the chemistry when you're actually there in the room with the student. I think there's pros and cons both ways. But if you have a student that, if you personally don't have a drum corps background, but they're interested in it, there's tons of highly qualified, educators that are available online to hook up with. And obviously, even just going to YouTube, there's tons of great, fundamental resource videos. But I don't know if this makes me old school or not. I would still say that at the end of the day, well, I guess I should say this. Instead of saying finding a right teacher in person is necessary to take the next step, I would say finding the right teacher is the next step, right? Because I think we've all kind of had these experiences before. I grew up thinking that I did not like history. I didn't like it in middle school. I didn't like it in high school. It was, this is so boring. Like who cares about any of this old stuff, right? Like I'd much rather watch Star Wars. This is more interesting, or so, whatever, right? And then I get to college and I had a wonderful history teacher, wonderful, and he just wrapped me into it. And I think I only got like a B+ or something. Like I didn't even get as good a grade as I'd maybe gotten in some other history classes when I was younger, but it didn't matter. Like this love and appreciation, and understanding, and it was because of the teacher. So that's probably the thing that I would recommend the most is taking sample lessons with like 2 or 3 different individuals and finding who you kind of connect with that have like a background in this that might be able to help the student move forward, and then kind of committing to that person.
Boy, great advice for Carson. That's a great advice, Doug, because it really kind of comes down to, we go back to that word inspiration. If we can be inspired to open our mind, then we get hooked. And when someone else has a passion, a deep passion, and you're around that person, it's hard not to get sucked into that passion. It's hard not to get, if someone is so into it. And it's funny you mentioned about history. I mean, now with American history, I am so into American history these past, these several decades, I should say. And I just love reading books. I've got hundreds of books that I've read on all the different people that played roles in there, and just all that. And I was never like that.
Yeah.
But I started meeting people that started talking about it in a way that was intriguing, and that sucked me into it. So great advice. So Carson, great advice. You'll track someone down that's into drum corps and do it. And I'd even say, Carson, what I'd highly suggest is contact Doug.
Yes, absolutely. Because if I'm not available, I will definitely have people that I can point you to that would be.
Absolutely. But your website is iceless.com. Is that what it is?
Islas. Yeah. My wife's last name is Islas. It's Spanish for islands. And so like our brand / band is Team Islas. That's right.
And that's also your Facebook. Team Islas is also on your Facebook.
Facebook, Instagram.
And Instagram too. Because I want everyone to know that that's how you can track down Doug for sure. Because I really believe that if we can get more of, especially the drum set artists, if we can get them more to study with someone like yourself, Doug, where we can open themselves up to see that. I had great, Al Miller here in Long Island was a great rudimental teacher. that I had studied with for many, many years. And he won at a young age, the age of 14, the New York State and then eventually national contests in drum corps. And he just had a certain love for it. So by going through all those books that I went through with him at a young age, it was fun because he was into it. Not only did it help my chops, it helped my reading. Yeah. And everything kind of came out of that in the course of the process of being able to understand it. So I think that would be absolutely an important part of it. So tell me about you and your wife putting together doing these duos.
Yeah, well, once we graduated, again, she's very performance mind oriented, and she's a mallet player, and was like, "Whew, I can't afford a marimba. These things are really expensive, but maybe I can save up and get a vibraphone." And so that's what she did. And even though I'd played in a lot of jazz trios and jazz settings, because my roots are in metal, I was pretty loud, and I hadn't quite learned the art of playing soft, and it took me a while to kind of figure that out. The music that she plays, she's not a traditional jazzer, not a traditional vibe player in terms of like improvising and doing standards and stuff like that. It's more structured, it's more written out, and we have an album out and some videos on YouTube. I don't know the best way to categorize it. It's kind of like fusion-y, electronic, like there's a lot of electronic backing stuff, that's involved in it. But I will say that that was another huge part in my development, was like learning how to actually play soft. And man, the range of sound that you can get from a well-tuned drum or a beautifully hammered cymbal and that pianissimo to mezzo piano, there's so much room in there that most people just, and I think that part of that discovery is, again, with my high school kids in drumline, the common thing in Texas is for drumlines to be told they're too loud, play softer, right? That's kind of, and we kind of often get the opposite. It's like, I can't hear you, I need you, and I think that kind of comes from this, is like, I say every year, like, look guys, like, who has trouble playing loud, right? Like, anyone could walk in the room and just smack a drum, right? The real art is being able to play here with like some control and sensitivity, and again, so at the end of the day, if someone hears Capel's drumline play and they hear like 10 other high school lines that are great, there's so many great lines out there. I hope the thing that they walk away from is like, man, Capel, like maybe they didn't play as many flam drags as fast as this other group, or maybe not as many stick tricks. But man, the range of expression, the touch on the low end, like that's more what we're kind of going for.
Well, that's great to hear, Doug, because, the range of expression is actually a page that's in my book that I had written, because I wanted people to understand that the range of expression is how we speak. If I speak at one dynamic and I'm in a monotone voice, and then I have myself speaking here, if I'm always speaking here, I've got my voice at this level, that's what, after a while, that just completely drains everyone of their energy, because there is no expression in that robotic voice sound. And by having that expression, George Lawrence Stone spoke about it with Morello, and Morello shared that as far as with stick control, going through the book Stick Control, going through it with full strokes first, just to stretch and develop and strengthen the muscles, then go back to the book again and play it in half strokes, the entire book, 1 page a week, and then go back again and do it in low strokes to create that level of dynamic softness. And when you hear great players play, we mentioned Steve Gadd before. Steve Gadd does not really play loud. He can play loud. You hear him mostly when he's playing. It's at a very pleasing sound of how he's able to express what he does, and that really is massive control.
Absolutely. And when I really listen to Chick Corea, and I really listen to Pat Metheny, and I really listen to Michelle Camilo, right? The amount of lyricism that comes from that range, because of the emulation of the human voice, right? And all these subtle nuances in it, right? And then I look at an instrument like the snare drum, which, yeah, we don't have the melodic and harmonic opportunities, but I mean, you can go from whisper soft to a crack of thunder immediately. I mean, it's called a forte flam, right? And so it's like what you're saying with a lot of the students that I teach now, we tend to do less exercises, but more like how Morello with master studies or whatever, we do them at all the dynamics.
Right.
Like, so we might have like a shorter, simpler paradiddle exercise than the school down the road. It might only be 8 bars long. Absolutely. But we're going to do it all at piano, and we're going to do it with the accents at mezzo piano and the accents at mezzo forte and the accents at forte. And over the years, I found by doing less exercises, but with a wider range of dynamic contrast, the control the students develop is so much more than if they're just playing loud all the time, building chops. Because I don't know about you, Don, but when's the last time you've played a piece of music that had no dynamics?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I go clinic these drum lines, they warm up for me. They play forte for 20 minutes straight.
Yeah.
Or maybe forte and piano if they're playing like accent to tap or whatever. And then they go to play their show music and they got crescendos and decrescendos and this and that. And surprise, surprise, the kids are struggling doing it. It's like, well, of course they are. Like, we're not putting it in our exercise program. We're not putting it in our foundation, you know?
Well, that point well taken. Great point. And I can remember taking lessons with Morello back in 1971, which was 50 years ago. It's a half a century ago. I was, 17, 18 years old. And it was kind of interesting. And he always in the conversation with any of these teachers that I had with, especially even Shelly Man, who I went to California to take lessons with on the West Coast, dynamics was everything. It was such an important part of the topic of the lesson. Unfortunately now, because of the music we're hearing on what we're exposed to, there are not as many dynamics.
Yeah.
And how they'll use dynamics is they just won't have as many instruments playing at the same time, but those instruments are still loud, but they've just lessened the amount of noise. So it's still powerful. So we're losing that level of expression. But that's a great point, Doug.
Yeah, we are. So I feel you on all that. It's funny, once my kind of battery students, like the kind of drummer, students, once they become juniors, they all have to work out of master studies. Because I felt for me, they have this strong, like you're saying, like Pratt, like they have this strong rudimental background in knowledge, and they have this strong orchestral background knowledge because they have to do like the Cerrone and the Peters and some of that stuff. Yeah. And to me, master studies, Joe, from this kind of jazz perspective, like bridges the gap between the two. Like they end up having to do these motions, these kind of invert motions and stuff that you would have to do if you were keeping time and comping, that you don't have to do in the rudimental orchestral world. And I find that it just opens the kids up so much, but they're usually not ready to really kind of dig into it until around being a junior, Yeah,
no, that's a great point. It's kind of interesting when I studied with Morello when we went through stick control, I think 9 different ways. So it wasn't like you went through it once. You went through it with different grips, German, French, American. You went through it full strokes, half strokes, low strokes. I mean, all those variations of going through it. And then when we went into accents and rebounds, the recent edition of accents and rebounds, I had the chance of working with the Stone family to add a lot of the movements and the up and down arrows in there. So students had a better idea of it. And it was from Accents and Rebounds that Morello inspired George Lawrence Stone to write Accents and Rebounds, which is why Stone dedicated the book to Morello. And when Stone on his deathbed asked Morello to rewrite Stick Control and Accents and Rebounds, Joe said, absolutely not. And Stone was kind of shocked by saying, Joe, I'm on my deathbed. I'm going to write my books. And Joe said, I'm not going to do it. And Stone said, why? He said, because they're perfect as they are. They work so well. What I'll do is I'll add on to it. So Morello's book really is a continuation of that Stone stick control, accents, and rebounds formula. But Joe adds it now with a musical drum set mentality. And boy, it's so great that you observe that and you see that, because that's really how it was written for.
And I love it. It was so formative for me. I wrote an intermediate book that's used, I would say fairly well throughout Texas, definitely in the area called Super Hands. And, kind of as a passion project. Fortunately, it's done fairly well. But I wrote, after Super Hands, I wrote Master Hands as kind of a tribute to Master Studies. I never obviously had the opportunity to study with Morello, but I've, my original copy of that book, like you're saying, like the cover's missing, there's like ketchup stains on it, right? You know what I mean? It looks the way a music book should, I think. There's indentions from drumsticks, and so I tried to take his ideas, or at least my interpretations of what I gained from his ideas, and kind of take them the next step with that. And so then for my own personal students, after they're done with Master Studies, then we transition to Master Hands and just kind of, go from there.
I want that material. I want to see that material. And
absolutely.
Because I want to start getting my students do the same thing. I'm serious, Doug. I want to have whatever material you have. I want to have access to that in the process. Jeff Mulvihill brought up a good point over here. And, he said here, which is an interesting point. We actually need more marching kids to play drum set.
Yeah.
Jeff, good point. So that is there, do you see a transition of how that can happen, where we can get these marching kids to start to open up to play the full kit?
Yeah, it is interesting. Like how you were saying, when I was younger, and I think when we were younger, you'd have your marching band and stuff, but there were also a lot of bands,
Yeah.
like just bands, and there's a lot less of that now with the younger students for sure. It still exists, but they tend to gravitate more towards the marching band thing. I guess maybe because it's a school activity. I don't know. It's a different thing. And like you were alluding to earlier, some of kind of like the commercialized music now, and kind of like what it means to be a drummer now, I think is maybe a little different than 20 years ago. And the tools you have to be successful. You know, the mistake that having my roots in drum set, the mistake that I find a lot of people make is when I hear great drum set guys talk about applying rudiments, it is almost always that. It's like, hey, I'm going to take Swiss Army triplets and I'm going to put them on, the tom and the snare and this and that. And it's like, that's not really what the marching guys need. Like what they need, like what I call when I'm teaching, I have maybe like 2 or 3 students every year that want to do drum set, right? I call it from the field to the throne. And it's more about like in the rudimental activity, the marching activity, or on marimba or any of these things, you're trying to balance your hands 100% of the time. You want this hand and that hand to make the exact same sound. Right. But when I'm sitting here and I'm hitting this ride cymbal and I'm hitting that snare drum, I'm wanting the best sound on the ride cymbal I can get. I'm wanting the best sound on a snare drum, right? And last year, I mean, if you can imagine, we were so lucky at our spring percussion concert to have Nate Smith as the guest artist.
Great player.
And, when I would ask him, hey, Yuan, why does Mr. Smith, I mean, he's just playing boom, boom, on the same drum kit you were, but he sounds so much better than you. Like, why is that, right? It's the same rhythms. The rudimental kids, I mean, they understand these rhythms, right? And even the coordination, it might be a little tricky at first, but it's the sound. Yeah. They have no idea how to produce a good sound on a bass drum because they've never even touched a bass drum pedal. They don't even know the parts of a bass drum pedal, right? Yeah. They don't realize that like a ghost note on a snare and a tap on a hi-hat might not always mean the same thing. Like you're watching Garibaldi and Tower Power, whatever, like that snare backbeat's going to be here and that hi-hat accent's going to be here. And then the hi-hat tap's going to be here and the snare goes so on. So like blending the instruments rather than balancing the hands. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Absolutely total sense. And that balance and feel, when it comes down to the incredible artistic expression, when I hear a drum set player play and they're pulling the most out of the entire kit, they're pulling the most out of their ride cymbal, the most out of their snare, their toms, their hi-hat, and their hands are changing and adapting immediately for those sounds to be drawn out of it. That's the artistic level of what this is and why the dynamics are so important for each hand in each position. I'm playing French grip on my ride and I'm playing Germanic grip on my snare drum for certain sounds. Even just that hand position delivers a different sound for what we are feeling at that time. So these are all part of you bring up really some great points of discussion.
Yeah, I think the rudimental drummers, at least in my experience, that get a little frustrated and discouraged when they come to drum set is that rhythmically it seems so simplistic, like in their mind, compared to what they're used to doing. Yeah. But the combination of the coordination and the touch required kind of discourages them because they're like, I don't sound good. Like, I don't understand. I'm playing what's on the page. Why doesn't it sound good? And it's like, again, because it doesn't have to do with what's on the page, right? It has to do with it has to do with the way that you're actually touching the instrument. You got to put some time in that bass drum pedal and, so on and so forth,
And put the time into it. Boy, before we leave, Doug, I want you to talk about Mapex and Majestic as far as just the products you have and how you're using them and how they have been advantageous to your playing.
Oh, man, Dom, the relationship with Mapex started in 2006 when they entered the marching market. And at the time, it was not public knowledge that they were going to do this. And a friend of mine in Minnesota was working with Chris Hankis. Like, Chris Hankis was designing the drums and he had gotten to the bass drum and they were doing some things about it. And my friend Paul Weber was like, well, hey, listen, if you want to really talk about marching bass drum, I know the guy. Is this dude in Texas named Doug Bush. So I get a phone call from Chris and hey, I'm friends with Paul Weber. And he doesn't even say he's working for Mapex. He's like, I'm just making some marching drums. And I was wondering what you thought would make a marching bass drum better, right? I figured it was a guy like in his garage as a hobby on the weekends, right? And we ended up having a 2-hour conversation just about marching bass drums. It turns out he also marched for Madison Scouts. He also marched top bass drum. And so many of our ideas were exactly the same as like how to elevate that drum. And sure enough, I get home and he's like, I'm going to send you an email with the pictures of some drums. And this email, and here's these Mapex marching drums. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And at the time, there was a facility, there's a facility in Nashville, but there was the one in Austin also.
I remember that,
that's where he was. And so I was about to go on the road with Blue Knights Drum and Bugle Corps, who I was teaching at the time. And he said, can I come down this weekend and bring you some drums and we'll hang out? And oh, yeah. Started a lifelong friendship. I mean, Chris is
gem of a guy.
I mean, just as good as they get. And immediately what struck me about this company, like immediately, I think why Patricia and I resonate with it so much is because literally when we were looking to get new drums at Coppell, we would talk to manufacturers of other than Mapex, right? Like the band directors. And we had one of them when they were expanding on like what made the snare drum great, what made the quads great. We said, well, what about the bass drums? They said, well, bass drum's a bass drum.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. It's
right. Another company, again, that I won't mention, but like they had made the same instrument that I had marched on 20 years ago, right? And it's still the same. There's no update. There's no improvement. So again, it's like kind of like the marimbas and the snares tend to get the preferential treatment.
Yeah.
The vibraphones and the bass drums kind of whatever.
Interesting.
Mapex and Majestic since day one have been like, if we are making it, like we're going to make the best version of it we possibly can. It doesn't matter if it's like a prophonic concert snare drum. It doesn't matter if it's a set of vibes or a set of chimes or a concert bass drum. It doesn't matter if it's fourth bass on the marching. Like what can be done to make a better, more innovative product?
Yeah.
And that, Patricia playing vibes and me playing bass drum just resonated so strongly with us. And in our own teaching, we intentionally put very, very strong young players on these other instruments, like on bass drum, on vibes, and they love it and they develop a unique voice. And what that does is create this culture where everyone feels included, everyone feels important, every instrument feels important, right? It's not like, if I keep practicing hard at this, maybe one day I'll get to play snare, or one day I'll get to play marimba, or one day I'll get to play drum set. It's like, no, this is my voice and this is who I am. And Mapex and Majestic are making an instrument that'll allow me to feel comfortable doing that, not to feel like I'm not getting the preferential treatment,
How amazing. This is so great that you're involved with them and part of this research and development of just making the product better. Times change, products change. We always make these movements for the better. And that's really, it's great to have you as a part of that to move this agenda forward. Doug, it has been an absolute pleasure to have some time with you, man. It's really, really fantastic.
Dom, I can't thank you enough. What a privilege. When I was first reached out about this, I was starstruck. I was just thankful for another opportunity to have a good conversation with you.
Well, we will sure have to not make this the last of them for sure. We'll have to do some more of those, especially with Patricia in the course of our journey.
Awesome.
I want everyone to go to your website, everyone to go to Facebook and social media, just check out Doug, go out and do the research. We've had people from Mexico, from Belgium, from all throughout the US, from Europe. It's amazing how many people have joined us here. So you'll see when you go back there, you can even answer some comments here. This is live on Facebook. It'll stay on Facebook, but also they will put this then onto the Mapex YouTube channel. So it'll live there forever. So everyone to go back and check it out. Doug, thank you so much. Stay well, stay safe, and I look forward to meeting you in person at some point in the near future.
You as well, Dom. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye.